The Adventure of the Tantalus Secret. It was a raw, foggy morning in the autumn of 1898, when an unusual client presented himself at our familiar rooms in Baker Street. Sherlock Holmes and I had only just finished breakfast. The table was still littered with toast crumbs and the morning papers, over which my friend had been poring with that abstracted air which told me his restless mind was already seeking occupation. The bell rang with a sharp, imperative peal, and presently Mrs. Hudson appeared to announce a gentleman who desired immediate speech with Mr. Sherlock Holmes. A moment later our visitor was ushered in. He was a tall, gaunt old man of 70 or more, with a pronounced stoop that made him seem even taller as he entered. His face was ruddy and weather-beaten, framed by a shock of thick white hair and a bushy beard in which traces of the original auburn still lingered. He wore an old-fashioned frock coat, much worn at the cuffs, and carried in his right hand a large black ear trumpet of vulcanized rubber, which he at once applied to his ear as he seated himself in the chair I indicated. "Good morning to you, gentlemen," he began in a rich Irish brogue that spoke unmistakably of County Kerry. His voice was raised to a shout, as is common with the deaf. "My name is Patrick O'Callaghan, late of Ballymakelligot in the aforesaid county, and now reside in these 20 years in London." Holmes regarded him with that quiet, amused interest he reserved for the more eccentric of our callers. "Pray be seated, Mr. O'Callaghan," he said, raising his own voice slightly. "You have come upon a matter of urgency, I perceive." "That I have, sir," the old man replied, leaning forward and adjusting the trumpet. "'Tis theft, brazen theft, from my own house in Kensington. 3 nights ago I returned from my customary evening walk to find my drawing-room disturbed. Nothing of great monetary value taken, mark ye, no plate, no coin, but 2 particular articles missing from the sideboard. A handsome oak Tantalus containing 3 cut crystal decanters of fine Irish whiskey, port and sherry, and a silver calling card case engraved with my initials." He paused for breath, and I noticed Holmes's eyes kindle with sudden attention. "The Tantalus," continued O'Callaghan, "was always kept locked, the key upon my watch chain, so that the liquor might be visible yet secure from casual temptation. Yet the entire piece, frame and decanters together, had been lifted clean away. The lock was untouched, the drawers undisturbed, save for the empty space where the card case had lain, and no sign of forced entry anywhere in the house." Holmes leaned forward, his thin, eager face alight. "Most remarkable, and you live alone?" "Alone, save for a daily woman who leaves at 6. I was out from 7 till 9 that evening." "And the thief left nothing in exchange?" O'Callaghan hesitated, then drew from his waistcoat pocket a plain white card and laid it upon the table. "Only this, sir." Holmes took it up delicately with tweezers and subjected it to his powerful lens. It was an ordinary visiting card bearing no name or address, but in the center had been hastily sketched in pencil a shamrock entwined with a serpent. "The paper is common," murmured Holmes. "The drawing hurried yet deliberate. The symbolism is striking, an Irish emblem embraced by the ancient betrayer. You recognize no personal significance in it?" The old man shook his head vigorously. "None, Mr. Holmes. Yet it chills my blood. I was a land agent in the troubled 80s. Evictions were my duty, though they broke my heart. Some swore vengeance then. Perhaps an old grudge has followed me across the water." Holmes handed the card to me. It was indeed crudely done, yet the intent was unmistakable. "Give me your exact address, Mr. O'Callaghan," said Holmes briskly. "I shall examine the premises this afternoon. In the meantime, touch nothing upon the sideboard." Our visitor rose, gathering his ear trumpet. "God bless ye, sir. I shall expect ye." When the door had closed behind him, Holmes sprang to his feet with that characteristic burst of energy which told me the scent was hot. "A pretty little problem, Watson. A locked Tantalus carried bodily away, a silver card case vanished, and a cryptic shamrock left in mockery. Add an elderly Irishman with a guilty past and profound deafness, and we have the makings of a singular case indeed. The game is afoot. That same afternoon we took a four-wheeler to Mr. O'Callaghan's residence in a quiet terrace off Kensington High Street. The house was a modest, respectable dwelling of the sort occupied by retired professional men of limited means, 3 stories, narrow, with a small area railed off from the pavement, and a brass knocker well polished by the daily woman. Everything about it spoke of faded gentility. Our client himself opened the door, ear trumpet already in position, and greeted us with a mixture of relief and anxiety. He led us at once to the drawing room on the ground floor, a comfortable apartment furnished in the heavy taste of the late Queen's reign. Dark wallpaper, a turkey carpet somewhat threadbare, a mahogany sideboard against the far wall, and over the mantel a few family portraits in oils, the faces stern and Celtic. "There, gentlemen," said O'Callaghan, pointing with a trembling finger, "that is the exact spot." Upon the sideboard, between 2 tarnished brass candlesticks, was an oblong space free of dust where some object had evidently stood for years. Holmes's eyes gleamed as he approached it. Without a word he dropped to his hands and knees, magnifying lens in hand, and began that minute examination which was so characteristic of him. I watched in silence as he crept over the carpet, scrutinizing every inch, then rose to inspect the sideboard itself. The polish, the drawers, the locks. He tested the window fastenings, examined the scullery door that opened onto the area, even descended to the basement to view the coal hole and area gate. 20 minutes passed before he spoke. "No sign whatever of forced entry," he remarked at length. "The window latches are sound, the doors undisturbed. The Daily Woman left at 6, you say?" "Aye, sir. Mrs. Doyle is most reliable. I myself went out at 7 for my constitutional, returning a little after 9. Holmes nodded. "And the Tantalus, a handsome oak frame with carrying handles holding 3 decanters locked by a bar across the stoppers?" "The very same. A wedding gift from my late wife's brother. I kept the key upon my watch chain." He produced a small Yale key on a length of chain. "The lock prevents the stoppers being withdrawn. But the whole piece may, of course, be lifted and carried away by any person of ordinary strength." "Precisely," said Holmes dryly. "The lock guards the liquor, not the Tantalus itself, and the silver calling card case. In the left-hand drawer beneath." O'Callaghan opened it to reveal a velvet-lined compartment, empty save for a few stray cards bearing his name. Holmes continued his examination, measuring the dust-free space with a tape, noting the faint impressions where the feet of the Tantalus had rested. He even applied his lens to the shamrock card which our client had preserved in an envelope. At length we took our leave, promising to communicate any progress. In the cab returning to Baker Street, Holmes was unusually silent until we were halfway home. "The case has points of interest, Watson," he said suddenly. "Observe. A portable object of some weight is removed from a locked house without trace of entry. Nothing else is taken, no silver, no valuables, only the Tantalus and the card case. The shamrock entwined with the serpent suggests an Irish grievance, yet the theft is almost playful in its precision. And our client's deafness, profound enough to require that trumpet, might well allow considerable noise to go unnoticed." "You suspect the old gentleman himself?" Holmes smiled. "I suspect nothing yet. But the key, Watson, may lie in the symbolism. The Tantalus displays temptation yet withholds it, much as the landlord displayed prosperity to the starving tenant while denying relief. The calling card case proclaims the gentleman's status, the very status that enabled him to serve eviction notices, and the serpent in the shamrock. Betrayal of the old country." That evening Holmes was busy with his telegrams and his great indexed volumes of criminal records. From time to time he muttered names familiar to students of the Irish troubles, Land League, boycotts, moonlighting. At length he closed the book with a snap. "Tomorrow, Watson, we shall see what Scotland Yard has to say. There may be similar cases on their books, and I confess I am curious to learn more of Mr. Patrick O'Callaghan's past." He leaned back in his chair, blowing thoughtful rings of tobacco smoke toward the ceiling, while outside the fog thickened and the lamps of Baker Street glowed dimly through the yellow haze. The following morning brought an unexpected visitor in the person of Inspector Lestrade, who arrived at Baker Street while Holmes was still at his breakfast coffee and I was glancing through the Times. The little professional ferret's sharp features wore an expression of mingled triumph and perplexity. "Good morning, Mr. Holmes," he began, rubbing his hands together. "I thought you might like to know that your Irish gentleman's case is not unique. We have had 3 similar complaints in the past 5 weeks, all from elderly Irish residents of London, all former land agents or estate officials during the troubled times. In each instance, the only articles missing were a locked Tantalus and a silver calling card case. No forced entry, no other valuables touched, and in every case a plain card left behind bearing a shamrock entwined with a serpent." Holmes's eyes sparkled. He pushed aside his plate and leaned forward eagerly. "The very thing. And the victims, deaf, any of them." Lestrade consulted his notebook. "One was stone deaf, like your Mr. O'Callaghan, uses an ear trumpet. The others were merely hard of hearing." "Excellent," murmured Holmes. "Pray continue." "Well, that's the sum of it. We've been at a standstill. No fingerprints worth the name, no traces. The press hasn't got hold of it yet. But we can't have a gang of Irish malcontents going about robbing respectable folk of their decanters." Holmes smiled faintly. "A revenge upon symbols, perhaps. The Tantalus, visible luxury forever denied to the starving tenant. The calling card case, the insignia of the gentleman who served the eviction notices, a picturesque form of retribution." Lestrade snorted. "Picturesque or not, we'd like to lay the fellows by the heels." Holmes spent the remainder of the morning visiting the other 3 complainants, while I accompanied him on 2 of the calls. All were elderly, solitary men living in quiet respectability. All spoke with regret of the harsh duties they had once performed in Ireland, and none could suggest a living enemy. One, however, a Mr. Mulcahy of Bayswater, mentioned that his sister's son, a fiery young nationalist lately arrived from Dublin, had visited him only a fortnight before the theft. "Sean O'Brien is his name," the old man said, "full of wild talk about the old wrongs. But he's a good lad at heart, wouldn't steal a pin." Holmes made a note of the name and we returned to Baker Street. He had scarcely settled into his chair when a telegram was brought in. It was from O'Callaghan and read, "Come at once. Another visitation last night. The articles returned. Urgent, O'Callaghan." We lost no time in hailing a cab and were soon back in the familiar drawing room in Kensington. Our client met us at the door, pale and agitated, ear trumpet trembling in his hand. "Look," he cried, leading us to the sideboard. There, in its old place between the brass candlesticks, stood the oak Tantalus, returned as mysteriously as it had vanished. But the lock now hung open, and when I lifted the bar, the 3 decanters were revealed. Everyone bone dry, not a drop remaining of whiskey, port, or sherry. Beside the Tantalus lay the silver calling card case, also returned, its velvet lining exposed and every card removed. Upon the polished mahogany rested a fresh visiting card, again bearing the penciled shamrock and serpent, but this time the serpent's fangs were shown striking into the innocent leaves. O'Callaghan sank into a chair. "Who can be doing this, gentlemen? To take my property, drink my liquor, strip my cards, and bring the empty husks back in mockery." Holmes examined the returned objects with intense concentration. He measured the dust patterns, noted that the faint outlines showed the Tantalus had been absent no more than 36 hours, and applied his lens to the crystal surfaces. "Smudged fingerprints," he murmured, "deliberately smudged, yet not entirely obliterated. And observe, Watson, the base of the Tantalus has been wiped clean of dust before replacement. Our thief is careful, yet wishes us to know he has been here." He turned to O'Callaghan with sudden briskness. "You heard nothing in the night?" "Not a sound, sir. My deafness, you know." "Quite so," said Holmes thoughtfully. "Quite so." As we drove away, he sat in silence for some minutes, his brows knitted. At length he spoke. "The game deepens, Watson. The empty decanters returned are a deliberate taunt, the temptation displayed, enjoyed by another, and finally denied even to the owner. We are dealing with no common thief, but with a mind that delights in dramatic symbolism. Tomorrow we shall follow certain lines of inquiry in Whitechapel. Tonight I have work to do." Holmes was in high spirits as we sat over our supper that evening. The return of the emptied Tantalus and the stripped card case had transformed what might have been a mere curious theft into a drama of deliberate malice and theatrical mockery. "The thief," said Holmes, lighting his pipe and stretching his long legs toward the fire, "has now revealed his true character. He does not steal for gain. He steals to humiliate. He carries away the locked temptation, unlocks it at his leisure, consumes the contents in private triumph, and then returns the empty shell to its owner with a flourish. The serpent strikes the shamrock. It is a studied insult." I nodded. "A personal grudge, then?" "Undoubtedly, but whose? The young nationalist nephew, Sean O'Brien? Possible, yet too obvious. Such a one would smash the decanters in the street rather than return them emptied with delicate care." Holmes rose and began pacing the room in that restless fashion I knew so well. "The paper of the cards is common, sold by the thousand in every stationer's shop. Yet I have traced the particular stock to a small establishment in Whitechapel, much frequented by Irish working men. Tonight, Watson, we shall visit certain haunts where Republican sentiment lingers." Accordingly, after nightfall, we exchanged our respectable attire for the rough clothes of dock labourers and made our way eastward. In a smoky public house off the Ratcliffe Highway, we lingered over pots of beer, ears alert for any whisper that might serve us. At length, in a corner booth, two men spoke in low tones of the Tantalus Avenger, who was giving the old tyrants a taste of their own medicine. One laughed softly and said the fellow had been seen, a tall youth with a Dublin accent, carrying a wooden frame wrapped in sacking 2 nights before. Holmes's eyes gleamed in the dim light. Sean O'Brien, it seemed, was indeed the man. Yet when we emerged into the fog-bound street, my friend shook his head. "Too pat, Watson. The whispers were almost too convenient, as though meant to be overheard. No, our quarry is more subtle than a mere hot-headed youth." The following morning, Holmes asked leave to borrow Mr. O'Callaghan's ear trumpet for further acoustical examination. Our client handed it over readily, and back in Baker Street, Holmes subjected the instrument to the closest scrutiny. It was a large, old-fashioned trumpet of black vulcanized rubber, flaring widely at one end and narrowing to a slender stem that fitted against the ear. Holmes unscrewed the stem with surprising ease and gave a low whistle of satisfaction. "Observe, Watson." He tilted the trumpet, and from the hollow interior slid a small Yale key, the duplicate, beyond doubt, of the one upon O'Callaghan's watch chain. I stared in astonishment. "Then the old man himself?" Holmes held up a cautionary hand. "Softly, Doctor. We approach the heart of the mystery. The deafness is genuine enough. He could move furniture, open and close doors, even carry a bulky object down to the street without fear of disturbing neighbors or being disturbed by them. The trumpet serves admirably as a hiding place for the spare key. But we need one final link." He spent the afternoon in his chemical corner, comparing pencil tracings from the shamrock cards with samples taken from O'Callaghan's own desk. At length, he straightened with a grim smile. "The graphite particles are identical. The paper matches exactly the stock in our client's writing case. And the fingerprints upon the returned decanters, smudged though they were, show the characteristic whorl pattern I noted upon Mr. O'Callaghan's right thumb when he handed me the trumpet." He sank into his chair and steepled his fingers. "The other similar thefts reported by Lestrade. Upon discreet inquiry at the yard this evening, I found only one other vague complaint, nothing matching our pattern. The series was largely embroidered by our client to heighten the drama and ensure my interest. I could scarcely credit it. But why, Holmes? The old man seemed genuinely distressed. Loneliness, Watson, the deadly loneliness of age and isolation. Deafness had cut him off from the world. His daily woman was his only regular companion. He craved excitement, importance, a story worth telling. What better than to stage his own mystery and summon the great Sherlock Holmes to unravel it? The shamrock and serpent were touches of genuine ingenuity, evoking old grudges that might have existed, yet were in truth the product of his own imagination. Holmes rose decisively. Tomorrow morning we return to Kensington. The confrontation must be gentle, for we deal not with a criminal but with a pathetic old man who sought a little brief notoriety. Lestrade shall be present, but no charges will be pressed if I can help it. Outside, the fog had lifted, and a pale moon silvered the rooftops of Baker Street. I retired to bed with the strange conviction that this case, for all its apparent simplicity, had touched upon one of the deepest tragedies of human nature. The following morning found us once more in the quiet drawing-room in Kensington. Holmes had telegraphed ahead, and Mr. O'Callaghan received us with a mixture of hope and apprehension, his ear trumpet clutched like a shield. At Holmes's quiet suggestion, he summoned his daily woman and instructed her to take the day off. We wished, he said, to conduct certain delicate experiments undisturbed. When the door had closed behind her, Holmes turned to our client with that calm, inexorable courtesy which could be more daunting than any bluster. "Mr. O'Callaghan," he began, "I have come to return your property and to close this investigation. The thief has been identified." The old man's ruddy face lit up. "God be praised, sir. Who is the scoundrel?" Holmes laid upon the sideboard the ear trumpet he had borrowed the previous day. Then, with deliberate care, he unscrewed the narrow stem and allowed the duplicate Tantalus key to slide out onto the polished mahogany. It rang faintly as it fell. "The thief, Mr. O'Callaghan," said Holmes quietly, "is yourself." For a moment there was utter silence. The old man stared at the key as though it were a living thing, then at Holmes, then at me. The ear trumpet slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. "Preposterous," he whispered at last, but the word died in his throat. Holmes continued in the same measured tone. "The evidence is conclusive. The fingerprints upon the returned decanters, smudged, yet not sufficiently to conceal the characteristic whirl of your right thumb. The penciled shamrock cards were drawn with graphite from your own desk. The particles match exactly. The paper is from your private stock. The duplicate key lay hidden in the hollow stem of your trumpet. A most ingenious cache. And the supposed series of similar thefts? Upon private inquiry at Scotland Yard, only one vague report exists. The remainder were embellishments designed to lend weight and urgency to your story." O'Callaghan sank slowly into an armchair, his hands trembling. The defiance had gone out of him. In its place was only a weary sadness. "Why, sir?" I could not help exclaiming. "You seem genuinely distressed." The old man raised his eyes, and in them I read a profound loneliness. "Aye, Doctor," he said softly, his brogue thickened by emotion. "Distressed I was. At the emptiness of my days, 20 years in this great city and not a soul to share a glass or a memory. The deafness shut me away like a prison wall. I read of Mr. Holmes's wonders in the papers, and I thought, if I could but bring him here, if I could stage a drama worthy of his genius, then for a little while I should matter again. I would have a tale to tell, visitors in my house, a purpose." He gestured toward the Tantalus, now refilled from bottles he had purchased to replace the emptied ones. "I carried it out myself after dark, hid it in the cellar, drank the liquor over 2 nights. God forgive the waste. and brought the empty frame back. The cards I drew with my own hand. It was a foolish vanity, gentlemen, the whim of a lonely old man who wished to feel alive once more. Holmes regarded him for a long moment, and I saw in my friend's face that rare compassion which lay beneath his cold exterior. "You have committed no serious crime," he said at length. "A temporary removal of your own property, a mild deception. No prosecution would lie, and none shall be sought. Inspector Lestrade is outside in the cab. He will take no action beyond my recommendation. Let this be an end of it. But I counsel you, Mr. O'Callaghan, seek honest companionship. Join a club, attend your church, speak with your neighbours. The world is not so barren as isolation makes it seem." The old man's eyes filled with tears. "God bless you, Mr. Holmes. I have been a fool, but never again." We left him standing in the doorway, a straighter figure than when we had first met him, the ear trumpet once more in his hand, but his head held higher. In the cab returning to Baker Street, Holmes was silent until we reached the familiar door. "A curious case, Watson," he remarked as we alighted. "No villain, no violence, only the pathos of age and solitude. Yet it illustrates a profound truth. The most elaborate deceptions are often wrought not for gain or malice, but for the simple human need to be seen and remembered." I could make no answer, for I was deeply moved by the strange and touching drama we had just witnessed. Some weeks have passed since the curious affair of the Tantalus came to its quiet conclusion, yet I find myself returning to it in thought more often than to many a more sensational case. There was no villain to be brought to justice, no desperate chase through the London streets, no glittering prize recovered, only an old man's loneliness and the gentle unmasking of a harmless deception. I have often observed that Sherlock Holmes, for all his professed disdain of emotion, possesses a vein of deep compassion that reveals itself at unexpected moments. In the matter of Patrick O'Callaghan, he showed it to the full. No word of the affair ever reached the newspapers or the official records of Scotland Yard. The old gentleman was spared even the mild publicity that might have attended a police caution. Holmes wrote to him once afterward, enclosing the address of an Irish social club in Camden Town, where elderly expatriates gathered weekly for cards and conversation. I believe O'Callaghan took the hint, for when I passed his house some months later, I saw fresh curtains at the windows and heard the murmur of voices within. Looking back, the symbolism of the stolen object seems almost too apt. The Tantalus itself, those crystal decanters gleaming with forbidden liquor behind their locked bar, mirrored the old man's own life. Memories of warmth and companionship visible yet forever out of reach, locked away by age and infirmity. The silver calling card case, emptied of every card, spoke of an identity that had faded until the man felt himself nameless in the great city. And the ear trumpet, that necessary bridge across the silence that enveloped him, had become also the hiding place of his small secret, the duplicate key that unlocked his brief, self-created drama. Holmes has filed the 2 penciled shamrock cards in one of his tin dispatch boxes, labelled simply O'Callaghan, 1898. From time to time he takes them out and studies them with that curious half-smile that tells me he is reflecting upon the stranger quirks of human nature. "Crime, Watson," he remarked one evening as we sat together over a pipe, "is common. Malice is common enough. But to fabricate an entire mystery from nothing, at considerable trouble and expense, merely to feel for a little while that one matters in the world, that is a rarity indeed. It reminds us that the deepest motive is not always greed or revenge, but sometimes the simple, desperate hunger for significance." I could not but agree. In an age when we read daily of violence and depravity, it is salutary to be reminded that the human heart can err as much from too much need of kindness as from too little. Thus ended one of the least sensational yet most poignant episodes in the long career of Sherlock Holmes, an adventure in which the greatest mystery was not the disappearance of a Tantalus and a card case, but the quiet tragedy of isolation and the lengths to which a lonely soul will go to hear, for one brief moment, the sound of footsteps upon its threshold.